So if we are to fear guns, we certainly should fear nuclear weapons. I don't have to make that point further, it's so obvious. Yet let me ask you a question. Do we fear the UK having nuclear weapons? Britain? Do we fear France having nuclear weapons? They have nuclear weapons. Interesting, no? Well, we do fear Russia having nuclear weapons. We fear China having nuclear weapons. So why is that? Because France and the UK are decent societies. Because they are free, relatively free countries. Russia and China are not. They're run by bad people. B-A-D, bad. Yes, there are good people and bad people on planet Earth. And that's why we fear nuclear weapons in the hands of the bad, but we don't fear nuclear weapons, which can kill millions, in the hands of the decent. Isn't it therefore obvious that the issue isn't nuclear weapons? The issue is who has them? That's the issue. If the Iranian government has them, they have basically promised they'll use them on Israel. And not just on Israel, but certainly first on Israel, because the greatest goal of the Iranian regime is to annihilate Israel, just as the greatest goal of Hitler was to annihilate Jews. That was more important to him than winning World War II. The greatest aim of the Iranian regime is to annihilate Israel, and they would use nuclear weapons, and they've even said, we don't care if we lose 10 million people. We have 60 million people. Israel, on the other hand, has what, 8 million people? So we can annihilate Israel, they can't annihilate us. So it is a very bad thing if Iran gets nuclear weapons. Is anybody afraid of Israel using nuclear weapons as a first use? No. Israel, everyone believes has nuclear weapons. We're not afraid of that either, just like with France or the United Kingdom. This is a very important thing. We care who has nuclear weapons, much more than we care that they exist. So too with guns. We care about who has them, not that they exist. And by the way, the founders of the United States believed that the idea that the only people who can have guns is the government is a very scary thought. I just want to remind you what you never learned in college, and you certainly aren't going to learn that today. In the 20th century, 100 million people were killed in what we call genocides, the staggering mass murders of tens of millions. In every case, except Rwanda in the 1990s, in every single case, it was done by government. Governments are genocidal engines. Governments are concentration camp builders. Governments are mass murderers. There is nothing to compare with the amount of evil done by governments. 100 million civilians were killed in the 20th century, all by big governments, except for the 1 million in Rwanda. Now, I'm not against government. I'm not an anarchist. Of course we need governments. But I don't like the idea that people have the state, the government, the government, the government, the government. Ronald Reagan turned me around. Do you know I became a Republican in one sentence? I was a Democrat my whole life. Ronald Reagan did it. The government is not the solution, it's the problem. And then I realized, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't I think of that? I had studied totalitarianism. That was my field of study in graduate school. So the idea, the founders, this is pre-totalitarianism, pre-20th century, but they knew the idea that if the only people who have weapons is the state, then that's not necessarily a good thing for liberty, for people to be free. That's why we have a Second Amendment in the United States. This was a very thought-through idea. If the government has all the power, it's not good for people. I once raised on MSNBC, believe it or not, they used to invite, on occasion, conservatives. And I was one. I went on Hardball with Chris Matthews, a very famous show at the time. And we were talking about guns, and I said, as a Jew, I would just like to say, I wish all the Jews of Europe had guns. He went ballistic. He started screaming at me that I was mocking the Holocaust. My God, my grandfather had a brother killed in the Holocaust. I've written a major book on anti-Semitism. I was on the Holocaust Museum's board of directors. Mock the Holocaust? But he was a leftist, and I didn't expect him to think clearly. But why was that an odd thing to say, that I wish every Jew in Europe had a gun? Would that have stopped the mass murder of the Jews? No, it wouldn't have. But it would have slowed it down, and it would have given Jews dignity. It is much better dying, killing your oppressor, than walking naked into a gas chamber or being killed naked. The Nazis were sadists, aside from evil. Virtually every Jew in the Holocaust died naked. It's an amazing thing that people don't think about. The notion that guns are the enemy, bad people are the enemy. That's true for everything. It's true for nuclear weapons, not just guns. A ban on purchasing a rifle until the age of 21, as Governor Greg Abbott pointed out. 18-year-olds have been able to buy long guns in Texas for more than 60 years. Yet for decades, mass shootings were rare. The recent proliferation of mass shootings suggests a deeper malady than gun laws can fix. Firearm laws were few and weak before the 1970s. In other words, it was a lot easier to get a gun in the United States before the 1970s. Yet only in recent decades have young men entered schools and supermarkets for the purpose of killing the innocent. That a teenager could look at a 9-year-old, aim a gun, and pull the trigger signals some larger social and cultural breakdown. That's right, and that's my point. We have a cultural and moral breakdown. That's the issue. And that's a dividing line between right and left. They're not keen on the values issue. They're keen on fighting inanimate objects. As I wrote a piece in 2020 when they were tearing down statue after statue, I think the title of my piece was "The Left Fights Statues, the Right Fights Evil." And this is another example. They fight guns, we fight evil. Big difference.